and he grabs me by my shirt.
Fuck.
And like pushes me back in my office. And I said, dude, get your fucking hands off me.
Those were the words that came out of you when Francis Ngannou grabbed you by the shirt?
Yeah. Here's the stupidity in Dana White privilege. Dana White privilege or all these other things that happen. You have a group of people, not just in UFC or in fighting, but in life, that if they don't make it and they don't get to where they thought they could, it's never their fault. It's somebody else's fault. I didn't have the Dana White privilege. I didn't have this and I didn't have that.
All right, so Dana White recently made 2 podcast appearances, and this guy is lying just to lie at this point. Like, if lying was an Olympic sport, he would be the Michael Phelps of that shit. Actually, no, I take that back, because that would mean he's actually good at lying, when in reality, he's been caught in so many bald-faced lies that it's impossible for me to take anything he says at face value. On the Trigonometry podcast, he tries to make the claim that Dana White privilege doesn't exist, even though I can think of like 10 fighters off the top of my head who've gotten undeserved preferential treatment, and when he was on Flagrant, I really feel like he made up some stories right there on the spot about Francis Ngannou to paint him as some sort of violent maniac, and yeah, in this video I'm going to be talking about all this and more.
Francis Ngannou is a bad guy. He's not a good guy. He plays the whole, I don't understand the language, and he tries to come off like he's a fucking nice guy, you know what I mean? And people go, oh, it's the language barrier probably. No, there's no fucking language barrier with this guy. He's a bad guy. And I told my guys, I wanted to cut him early. And 2 of my matchmaker guys are like, oh, no, you don't understand. I said, guys, let me tell you a story. When somebody shows you who they are, believe them.
So before I go any further, I want to make it clear that I think Francis has done enough stuff lately, namely when it comes to his tenure in the PFL, to make me question how good of a person he really is. Considering all the things that they offered him, from his pay to giving him an executive position, in contrast to him being comically inactive as a fighter, I think it's fair to say that he knowingly scammed them. I'm not going to push back too much on what Dana says here, but I will say that Dana calling somebody a bad person is a textbook case of projection.
So he's going in to fight Stipe Miocic in Boston. And he knows he's going to fucking kill Stipe, right? So after the press conference, we're walking down this hallway, and he comes over to me and he grabs me. And he says, let me tell you what's going to happen. His English is fucking great, okay? No language barrier whatsoever. When this fight's over, you're going to book me a private plane to Paris. And I said, I laughed and said, oh yeah. He goes, I'm not joking. You're going to book me a private plane to Paris. So, okay. So we go our own ways. Stipe Miocic beats the fucking shit out of him. Beats the shit out of him. So that ended that whole conversation. And I should have fucking cut him that day.
I do not believe that this ever happened. I really don't. And I'm not a psychologist or a body language expert or whatever, but it just seems like he's making up this story as he goes along. Like, if this really did happen the way that Dana describes it, then why is this the first time we're hearing about this, and not 4 years ago when this guy was doing all that he could to drag Ngannou's name through the sand? I would also like to add that the weird low voice that Dana's using here is the exact same voice that he used during his monologue about wiretapping an illegal streamer's phone.
We're watching his house. We're listening to his phone conversations. And when he puts up this, if he puts it up on Saturday, we got him.
I'm assuming that this is just the voice that he uses when he's making up a story on the spot, because I think that this Francis story is every bit as unbelievable as him illegally wiretapping a random dude's house.
When you're an athlete that's signed by the UFC, you get full access to the Performance Institute, and he had just fought, and he comes up to my office, and he's in the hallway or whatever, hanging out, and I said, come on, what's going on? And he was pissed off that he didn't get a $50,000 bonus in his last fight, that he didn't get the bonus of the night. And I said, well, Francis, you didn't get it because this, that. And he's in my office and he's arguing with me. And I'm like, yeah, this guy got this guy got that, and this is why. So the conversation's over. I'm starting to leave. And he grabs me by my shirt.
Fuck.
And like pushes me back in my office. And I said, dude, get your fucking hands off me.
Those were the words that came out of you when Francis Ngannou grabbed you by the shirt?
Yeah.
Wow.
And,
this story is even less believable than the other story. So you're telling me that Francis Ngannou was prowling around the UFC PI, hunting down UFC executives, physically assaulting them, and we're only hearing about this now? You're telling me that a state-of-the-art facility like the UFC PI, where professional fighters go in and out on a daily basis, isn't covered with security cameras in case something like this goes down? If this actually happened, which it didn't, do you really think that an egomaniac maniac like Dana wouldn't fire Francis on the spot and spread the news of what happened to every corner of the world. And just going back to the previous story, Dana claims that he was on the verge of firing Francis for demanding a private plane back to Paris, but when he actually gets physical with two of the top members of the UFC, they instead promote the shit out of him and then feed him Stipe Miocic and then tried to offer him a contract extension. This is really up there for one of the worst lies this guy has ever tried to sell us. Dana really likes to hammer down that Francis is actually much better at English than he lets on, as if to insinuate that he's a snake in the grass. And although that may be true, the guy speaks like 3 languages where he learned English well into adulthood, which is very hard to do. Compare this to Dana, who speaks 2 languages fluently, which are English and bullshit.
Now he's over and he's done a deal with PFL in Saudi Arabia, and now he's asking to fight, me and John Jones need to fight, and fucking, I'm sure they wish they never fucking signed him.
Hey, look, I consider myself a fair guy. I do agree with Dana on this. I am positive that the PFL cannot be happy with signing Francis considering the vast amount of accommodations that they gave to him. But at the same time, 2 things can be true. Francis did scam the PFL, but I also think that Dana's stories here are shameless lies that he crafted because Ngannou was able to make mountains of more money outside of the UFC, and that does look bad on Dana. Francis might really be a bad guy, but as Dana himself likes to say, when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. And he has shown us time and time again that he is in fact a liar. He lied about never getting rid of Strikeforce after he bought them out. He lied that the Reebok deal would be good for fighters. He lies all the time about fighters not wanting to fight. He lied about defending Demetrius Johnson when he was in the UFC. This guy just likes to lie. And if it somehow gets revealed that these stories about Francis are actually true, then I'll be the first one to admit that I was wrong. But again, these stories happened damn near a decade ago, and he just decides to reveal them now. Dan Hardy was fired for supposedly yelling at a UFC executive, but nothing happens to Francis after he gets physical with the 2 head honchos of the company.
Here's the stupidity and Dana White privilege. When you bring guys in, there's people that you think could possibly become world champions, right? As we've been talking through the whole interview, everybody wants to become a world champion. Well, there's people that you think have a much better chance than others do. So you prop these people up and you put them in positions and see what they're capable of doing. I mean...
Okay, but is this not by definition giving some fighters preferential treatment, hence Dana White privilege? I'm not saying that the UFC should have strict standardization when it comes to giving out title shots. Like, it would be ridiculous to say that all fighters need to win a minimum of 4 fights in a row before they get a title shot, but what's also ridiculous is seeing some fighters get title shots after 1 UFC win or when they get title shots in their UFC debuts. He also straight up uses the term prop up, and maybe it was just a poor choice of words out of the guy, but when I hear a fight promoter say that he props up certain fighters, that immediately makes me think that he intentionally sets up some fighters to succeed more than others. Sean O'Malley, who I think that we can all agree is a Hall of Fame DWP benefactor, fought absolute tomato cans for the better part of his entire UFC career until he was given a huge step up in competition against Petr Yan. And of course, O'Malley ended up winning the title fair and square, but given how he barely made it past Petr, which I still feel like he lost that fight, and considering how he looked in his 2 fights against Merab, I'm not totally sure where he actually stacks up amongst the top bantamweights because he was able to avoid a lot of the contenders in his division. Michael Chandler got a title shot in his 2nd UFC fight ever after he beat Dan Hooker, who was coming off of a loss. Mike is 2-5 in the UFC, and he's still being marketed as if he's some sort of title contender. During his most recent fight with Patty, the broadcasters were speaking some nonsense about how Chandler is still on the cusp of a title shot, even though he was on a 2-fight losing streak where his last win was over the withered corpse of Tony Ferguson. Colby Covington's entire career is built on grinding out decisions over fighters who are past their primes, and even though his first title shot was probably warranted, his second and especially third title shots were not justified at all. Dana makes the claim that he props up some fighters because he thinks that they can be champions more so than other guys, but we all know that the truth is he sees some guys as more marketable and will put them at the front of the line in hopes that they can make him more money, even if it's obvious that they might not be able to handle elite competition. Just compare Michael Chandler's road to a title shot to guys like Merab, who had to win 9 fights in a row before getting his title shot. Junior Dos Santos had to win 7 fights, which is ridiculous for heavyweight. Yoel Romero was on an 8-fight winning streak before given an interim title shot, and Tony Ferguson won 12 fights in a row before being given an interim title shot. These guys were very clearly amongst the elite of their divisions, but Baldy over here didn't see them as walking dollar signs, so he gave them the runaround as long as he could before he was forced to actually give them what they deserved. Dana White privilege is obviously a thing in the UFC, and the fact that Dana claims like it's all in our heads is a crazy gaslight.
Conor McGregor is a guy that was accused of having Dana White privilege. Arguably one of the biggest superstars in sports, let alone the UFC. Ronda Rousey, when I brought her in, Dana White privilege. Huge superstar for us and literally launched female fighting for us. Bo Nickel is a guy that came in, with a lot of heat on him. So you put him in these fights and these positions to see if he can perform. That's what you do. So that's called fight promotion, is what that's called.
It almost sounds like Dana's making a good point here, but it's really not. First of all, Dana White privilege was coined by Tony Ferguson in 2022, which is after Conor and Ronda had stopped fighting. Also, I think that Dana's trying to weasel his way out of these accusations by creating a false equivalency. Just because a fighter ends up becoming a champion or a star doesn't mean that they didn't have Dana White privilege. In fact, I'd say that a lot of times stars can be artificially manufactured simply because they were pushed by the UFC marketing machine. And to be fair to Conor and Ronda, I think that their paths to becoming champions were fair enough, and I fully believe that they would have been stars regardless of being pushed by the UFC. Conor was on a 6-fight win streak before fighting Jose Aldo, where he beat Dustin Poirier and Chad Mendes along the way, and Ronda was the Strikeforce champ when the UFC bought them out, so it only made sense to have her be the first UFC women's champion. I don't deny that they were given more than a little DWP, especially seeing as Conor was the first fighter in history that was allowed to fight for double champ status without ever defending his featherweight title. But a fighter can receive Dana favoritism without ever being a champion or a superstar. Like, yeah, McGregor and Rousey became champs, but does that in and of itself mean that there aren't fighters who are getting fast-tracked to title shots or being marketed as fan favorites when they don't deserve it? Bo Nickel is probably under the spotlight the most these days as getting unwarranted DWP. He was inexplicably placed on the UFC 300 main card above fighters who were much more established than him, and he was even on the UFC 322 main card before fans bullied the UFC to put him on the prelims, and the only time Bo was ever put up against higher quality competition, he got obliterated, yet the UFC is still trying to prop him up as a superstar, hoping that he'll grow into that vision. And regardless of whether he does or doesn't fill the shoes that Dana created for him, that doesn't mean that he wasn't given an easier path to fame and notoriety than guys who are more skilled than him. Dana White privilege is real. Dana knows that it's real, and he's lying through his veneers by saying that it isn't. Regardless, yeah, Dana's a fucking liar, and maybe I'm just used to sniffing out his bullshit after all these years, but it really does seem like he's getting worse at it. From the Dana White privilege stuff to the Francis fairy tales, these are just a few more examples to throw on the mountaintop of lies that he's spun. Anyways, that's the video for today. Definitely let me know what you think about these stories from Dana. Do you think Dana's lying about the Francis situation, or do you think that these could actually be factual? As always, if you like the video, then like the video, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. I appreciate you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.
I didn't like Francis as a person. Wasn't a guy I wanted to do business with. My boys were telling me he's misunderstood, and I told them, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them. Yeah, it wasn't about him becoming the heavyweight champion of the world. Francis isn't a good guy. He plays the good guy. I don't understand the language, and so he seems like he's a nice guy. He's not, and he's just not a guy that I wanted to be in business with.